the questions up as we go along, if that's okay. Just to let you know, we're recording this webinar, and it'll be on our website probably towards the end of the day or tomorrow. Una and Alex has also prepared presentation and for slides, which I'll also circulate to everybody after the meeting, if that's okay as well too. I'll probably be taking a couple of photographs in terms of our social media. So if that's okay, if you don't want to be included in that, that's no problem at all. If you want to just turn your camera off, and we can take it from there. But we're envisioning the session will not last any more for an hour. So between the presentation, hopefully some questions that you'll have for Una and Alex, and they'll hopefully be able to answer that. So hope that's of any use. If anybody's any queries in the meantime as it's going along, you can send me a private chat as well too, or you can just send the questions within the chat box. So with that in mind, I'm just going to hand over now to Una and Alex, and they're going to talk about how we all start getting back into our offices, if possible.
Okay, thanks Conor, and thanks Aidan and Kate for inviting us to work with you on this seminar, or webinar I should say. We've been doing a few of these now over the last couple of weeks, and we started the process mid-July, where we ran a larger seminar with the Public Health Agency, with the Health and Safety Executive, our insurers, to try and look at the kind of overarching issues associated with return to premises. And a result of this, we put these webinars together to look at very practical considerations that we as organisations need to make in planning to go back into our work premises. If anybody was listening to Good Morning Ulster this morning, and then a little bit of Stephen Nolan, you'll have heard the Minister for Health, the Chief Scientific Officer, the Chief Medical Officer on talking about the current COVID-19, I suppose, rate of increase and the impact that that might have. And I expect that tomorrow when they meet, we may get some further advice on numbers and changes and all of that. So I suppose what we're saying is today, our presentation is based on where things are at this moment in time, but it's a very, very changing picture. We know in the Republic of Ireland from yesterday, numbers for outdoor meetings and indoor meetings have been greatly reduced. So I think we can expect potentially to follow suit here as well. So I suppose just to say, to bear that in mind, and any changes that we get and any further advice that we get, we will update it, and I'll certainly keep Conor posted on all of this, and we make sure that we keep you informed of the changes. But in general, the principles will remain the same. So what we're going to be talking about today, if I can get my slides up, a wee bit about the legal context and the key principles that we have found that we think that organisations should follow. Something on the workplace risk assessment process. So Alex will talk people through the process itself, and then NICFA's risk assessment, because I think that gives you something really useful to work on, where you're saying, you know, we're giving you advice and guidance on what we've done and how we have communicated that then to staff and volunteers. And then I'll talk a little bit about activity and what organisations need to do around your actual activity and not just actually being back in your work premises. And as Conor said, we're happy to take Q&A. There's a big number here, so it could be tricky enough, but we'll do our best. I'll look at the questions as we go along and try and answer them as we go along as well, and certainly at the end. But please feel free afterwards if you want to contact me or Alex directly, or go to Conor and Conor, and I can discuss it, and we can get back to you and give you as many answers. I know some people ask very specific questions, and we don't have the specific answers. We're learning ourselves, and we're learning a lot as we go along here. So there's certain things that we can answer, but where we can't, we do our very best to get you an answer on that. So that's where we're coming from. So first of all, many of you already will be following the Health and Safety at Work Northern Ireland Order, and that's basically the background to any of the health and safety legislative requirements on our organisation. So if you're responsible for your employees, you will also be responsible for the health and safety of your employees at work. And this is really the underpinning principles of anything that you need to do with regard to going back to work, and the principles around how you deal with that and how you actually protect your staff in terms of their health and well-being. And there's lots of regulations associated with that. So I've noted there the management of health and safety at work regulations. You don't need to go into all of that. It's just to give you a sense of the basis of where a lot of the context is. And then 2 additional regulations, which will be no surprise to anyone, around the restrictions on business and gatherings. So that's really about the numbers. And that is a regulation introduced, obviously, for the current set of circumstances that we're in. And then the second regulation around the wearing of face coverings. And interesting to note that when we first did this webinar, the wearing of face protections was not to be considered until the 20th of August by the in terms of the regulation, but that was brought forward. So it gives you a sense of how things change. So they weren't meant to make a decision on that until the 20th. It was brought forward to the 10th of August, and now it's mandatory for people to wear face masks. So it's just, I suppose, reinforces the change in picture that we're actually dealing with. In terms of the health and safety at work order, and I think this is a really critical point that people should note, that the responsibility does not necessarily always rest with the employer. And you'll find when Alex goes through her presentation, there's a lot of emphasis on what we as employees also need to do in the context of keeping ourselves safe and our colleagues safe. So the health and safety at work order places a duty on employees and employers around that, so that we don't, that we as an employer do not behave negligently, and also as employees we are taking heed of our own protection. And all of it is based on a risk assessment process. And the risk assessment process principally takes 5 steps. 1, which is identify the hazards in every aspect of our work, decide who might be harmed and how, evaluate the risks and decide on precautions, record your findings and implement them, review and update if necessary. And if you go back, a long time, risk assessment processes, and I've talked about health and safety for many years, risk assessment processes will all follow those key 5 steps, and the principles of that will follow suit in terms of the risk assessment process that you will need to undertake in return to premises in this context. So the key principles that we are basing all of our plans on, and this is based again on the professional advice. So we've been following the government advice. We've been keeping ourselves updated on any of the written advice, as I've mentioned, changes on a regular basis. But the key principles around maintaining a 2-metre physical distance is what we are following. If you cannot do that, then other steps would need to be taken to protect people, and Alex will go into that in more detail. Good ventilation, so if you can open windows, that is the best thing that you can do, and that would be the key piece of advice that people would be receiving from Chief Medical Officer as well. Now, that's going to be a challenge for us as we head into the winter months, but we'll have to deal with that as it comes. Regular hand washing, sanitising and enhanced cleaning in our place of work. And the key thing will be around anyone presenting with symptoms needs to not come to work or remove themselves from the workplace, and that is a given. We would encourage people to comply with the quarantine and contact tracing, and there's been lots communicated on the contact tracing app, and there's lots of information on that, and we would really encourage people to do that, and that's starting to show an impact now that people have signed up and that people are being contacted with regard to that. Keep people working from home if possible, and the advice still says work from home if you can. We're continuing to do that. We haven't planned a date for it. We are planning for the return. We are putting all of the provisions in place to return. And again, when Alex starts to go through her presentation, there's quite a lot to think about. So we're encouraging people to think early, to plan early, to try and think about all of these things in advance, even if you're not planning to go to work into your work premises in the near future, so that you have everything in place and there's not a panic situation whenever it's time to go back into your working premises. and supervise and monitor the practice. So it's not good enough to just do your one-off risk assessment and leave it and say to people, you need to wash your hands without monitoring it, or you need to do, so you have to monitor the practice, and you have to, and this is when we talk about later, the protocols that we believe that you need to have in place, not just for your employees, but also for users of your facilities. And one of the key things I picked up from the health and safety executive really is around PPE, and it's not a silver bullet. So, it's not enough to say, well, we've got PPE in place or whatever. It's to think about what else you need to do, and what are the other things that you need to put in place to ensure the safety of your staff. So they're the key principles that we've been following, and the key principles under which we've made decisions about what we NICFA will do when we decide to go back into the workplace. So I'm going to hand over to Alex now to go through the risk assessment process in a little more detail. All right, Alex?
Yes, thank you, Una, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. You're going to hear a lot about risk assessment from me for the next 15 minutes, so bear with me. I know it's quite a dry topic that we've all had to get our heads around recently. For those of you who don't know me, I'm NICFA's HR manager, and I'm not a health and safety expert, but I've had to turn my hand to this since all of this started. And actually, in relation to our own risk assessment, it was May time that I started thinking we need to get something in place here, and that has been a work in progress ever since then. So if you haven't started, now's the time to start thinking about how you might prepare to return to your premises and conduct your risk assessment. Our risk assessment at the moment is about 13 pages long, so really it is quite a big piece of work. In terms of the context that Una has already touched on, the guidance remains from the Department of Health that we should continue to work from home. And to further that, the guidance from the body of employment, the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, they're urging employers to think about 3 key principles. And I think these are quite useful if you're thinking about returning to your workplaces. The CIPD are urging us to consider, is it essential? Is it sufficiently safe, and is it mutually agreed? And I think those are very valuable principles that we have adopted whenever we've been considering our own return to work. At the moment, we don't think it is essential. We continue to work from home. Is it sufficiently safe? We need to get all of our risk assessment completed and all of our provisions in place before it is deemed to be sufficiently safe. And is it mutually agreed? And that's about talking to your staff and your volunteers and including everybody that's going to be involved in the process and subject to some of the mitigations that you're going to be putting in place to keep everybody at work safe. So really those are the principles that are underpinning the process. We are recommending at NICFA that you use the Health and Safety Executive template. I'm going to hold it up here at my screen. It's a very standard template. It has just really a few columns that identify where there may be hazards. And I have found that the most useful way of structuring your template is to describe the hazards in terms of the areas within your building. So take an area and risk assess that area and its use. So for example, your reception area, for example, your corridors, your kitchens and your washrooms. I find that the most helpful approach for us because it really focuses your mind in the use of one specific area. And then you're thinking about the main controls for each of those areas and the mitigations that you need to put in place, and then perhaps some of the purchases that you will need to make. You can get an expert in to do your risk assessment. You can have somebody who is a health and safety trained expert in, and they will conduct a risk assessment for you on this. And that's one option, and that's a paid for option. Or you can do this yourself, and that's what we've done. And that's why we're doing this webinar, to see if we can support you to do that yourself, because really we feel, and having done it ourselves, we feel that really you know best how your building is used, how your staff and volunteers use it, and how your service users and visitors to your building use it. And walking through that process yourself might give you, as a management team, confidence in sharing your decision making with staff, and gives you the ability to explain your decisions and your thought processes around it. And my strong advice is to prepare your paperwork in advance. So I tried to write down some of my thoughts before I went into the workplace to conduct it. It'll hopefully structure some of your thoughts and raise some questions before you enter your premises to conduct the risk assessment. And we would suggest that you try and do the risk assessment thereafter on site if it is safe to do so. We did it with a couple of us, Una, myself and our caretaker. So you may not want to do it alone. You may want to socially distance with a colleague or two and have a good conversation about it, but make it practical. Use a measuring tape. Make sure you have that with you. 2 meters is bigger than you think it is. And walk through your building and imagine how people coming to your building use the space and use your premises. And you need to then think about the potential risks associated with the use and the flow of staff and volunteers within your building. So for example, whenever you're thinking about signage, think about where it's practical to place that signage near a sanitising station, on the back of a toilet door, for example. So you need to really think quite practically about what's appropriate. Could you go to the next slide, please, Una?
Sure. There we go.
So really, once you've got your preparation in place, thought about who to involve at what stage, and you've started your documentation and you're thinking about your record keeping, you then need to think about some of the key things that may mitigate risk in all of the different hazard areas within your workplace. And Una has touched on some of these, but some of the key principles are really social distancing, thinking 2 meters at all times. At NICFA, we realise that we are fortunate to have a big building with quite a lot of space in it, but you need to measure workstation proximity. How close are your staff to each other? And can the workstations and the desk areas comply with 2 meter social distancing? And if so, that's ideal. But measure it and make sure of it. If you can't comply with 2 meter social distancing, if it's not possible, think of other mitigations as part of your risk assessment, such as having desks side to side and not facing each other, or even back to back. Think about the use of barriers if that's appropriate, if it is quite a tight space, so you could consider the use of perspex screens. Open windows and increase ventilation, which is all very well in the summer, but may be more challenging come winter time. Avoid hot desking, avoid people using the same shared hard surfaces. If that is a practice that you've had, can you avoid that? So think about those and include those in your risk assessment, and limit face-to-face contact. So something that we have done is try to think of our offices as bubbles. You don't want any more than the people that work in those offices to enter those offices, except for perhaps your cleaning staff. And again, these are the things that you can include in your risk assessment. In terms of social distancing, you need to be thinking about the flow of your building and how is it used. Is there going to be high traffic? Are there going to be high traffic areas? How are you going to manage social distancing within those? For your staff coming into work, for example, you could consider staggering your start and finish times. That may not be an issue if you've got low volume of staff and volunteers coming in, but it's a simple measure that you could include in your risk assessment, and you could talk to staff about that. And overall, the idea is try and reduce the numbers in your building. So can you have some of your staff working from home and some in the workplace? And you may want to consider a one-way system. That would be another option that you may have seen in some shops. Whether or not it's stuck to and is that effective is up for debate, I suppose. Okay, the next slide, please. The next practical step and a key thing that's going to run through all of your hazards and mitigations in the workplace and in your risk assessment is about good hygiene practice. So obviously washing hands is one of the key measures. So do you have the facilities to do that? Can you enhance those facilities? Have you only usually had hand washing occur in toilets and restrooms and bathrooms? Can you now provide hand washing facilities in your kitchens, for example, and encourage it in your kitchens? So put signage in your kitchens and your washrooms that encourage hand washing. The PHA have free signs that you can print them in colour, laminate them, stick them up all around the place, and encourage good practice. We have heard that it is advisable to put hand dryers out of use if possible and provide disposable hand towels. So in doing so, you should also think about where disposable hand towels will be placed after use. So think about your bins. We have replaced all of our bins at NICFA with pedal bins, pedal operated, so no touch, and they're soft close. And this is a big business now, so we find it's quite challenging to get a bin at a good price at the moment. So start your research early. Provide tissues and have the pedal bins for used items. Have the catch it, kill it, bin it signs placed about, and think about your sanitising stations. Have hand sanitizer. Think about what type you want. Do you want just a little push pump? Do you want an automatic one? Do you want a pedal operated one? And there's a huge range in the cost of these as well. But think about where you're going to strategically place these. Place these at high touch point areas near door handles and push plates, and maybe before people go into the kitchens. And another thing about good hygiene practices that at NICFA we're thinking about having desk packs for all our staff. A little box with a packet of tissues, packet of some hand sanitizer, and a packet of antibacterial wipes. And we're putting the onus on our staff to use them and to keep their own workstation clean. Next slide, please, Una. So cleaning, you know, the first thing that you should do is think about your office space. Is it tidy, or are there lots of surfaces upon which cleaning maybe does or doesn't occur? Having a clutter-free room with fewer surfaces for dust, dirt, germs, viruses to collect on is going to make it a lot easier for your cleaning staff to clean. So implement a clutter-free, tidy and clear desk policy and monitor that. This is your time to do it if your buildings are empty or partially empty, to get those buildings and premises clean and tidy. You should implement a more regular and enhanced cleaning regime probably than what would have been in place prior to this situation. And that may include having a regime written out for cleaning staff or caretaking staff. Include your staff in it, give them responsibility for their own workstations, and remind people about cleaning hard surfaces that they are touching, for example, printers. Deep something that has been mentioned quite a lot throughout this. A deep clean is very valuable for any building at any time, I think, not necessarily just now because of the coronavirus and the impact of it. But if your building has been empty, the risk is probably quite minimal, and a deep clean is probably just good practice at the moment, and will give confidence to your staff returning to work. And really, you should be thinking about minimising contact with hard surfaces where possible. But if there is going to be regular contact of hard surfaces, that you enhance the cleaning regime, thinking about the handrails, the door handles and the push plates that are going to be regularly touched by large numbers of people. You may think that after lunchtime is quite a good time, and after break times to clean kitchen areas, for example. If you're holding meetings, you will want to have cleaning regimes in place in between each meeting, particularly if there's different groups of people using those meeting rooms. Okay, the next slide, please, Emma. NICFA's own risk assessment followed the Health and Safety Executive template, as I've said. We identified the hazard areas and then walked through the mitigations that we feel are important to mitigate against the risk. We prepared the document in advance. We went through it section by section for each area of our building, thinking practically, how is this building used, and therefore what are the risks and how can we mitigate against those. I walked through it with two colleagues, Una and our senior caretaker Michael, who many of you will have met, and we had a chat about each of the areas, how it was used. We talked about options. There's very few times were there any black and whites, and we had to discuss through these grey areas to try and agree on what we felt was the most reasonable mitigation. We used a measuring tape, there was no guesswork, and we took notes throughout. That you're going to have a lot of information, so you won't remember it all. So take a pen, take your notes, take your iPad, whatever's useful, and after you've conducted it on site, decide who's doing what, agree those actions, and there's a column in your risk assessment which says sort of the status of the action. Note in there who's doing what. And we wrote a shopping list. We had to buy stuff. We didn't have all of this stuff in place, and it got longer, and it's being added to as we go on. So what do you need to buy? And there's often a lead time on some of these items that are in high demand at present. We then put our draft in place. We started shopping for some of the items, and we discussed it with our senior management team. And all of this is still a work in progress for us. We have now shared it with our trade union group and got feedback from them. And it's been sent to all of our staff for a week's time for them to review it and feedback any opinions and comments that I haven't thought of, and that they can valuably contribute. That's part of this process about involving your staff. What we have done on our own risk assessment is on one of the first pages is say that our risk assessment is based on 2 principles. One is social distancing and maintaining that at 2 metres. And 2 is good hand hygiene and good hygiene practice. And if those mitigations can't be met, if those safety measures can't be met, so for example 2 metres can't be met, that we would need to think about other mitigations, and that could include the use of face coverings in your workplace, for example, or using screens, etc. But at NICFA, those are the 2 principles which are underpinning our entire risk assessment. So I'm going to now talk you through our risk assessment. I'm going to talk you through it area by area. Lucky you. I'm going to start with our reception areas, or entering our building, just the simple act of entering your workplace. Who enters it? When do they enter it? Are they likely to come in contact with each other? Is it possible to socially distance 2 metres? If it is possible, can you put signage? There's stickers that you can buy. We're going to use those at NICFA, and we're going to put them on the floor, because people invariably behave in a way that they've always behaved, which is probably getting a bit closer than they should be. And 2 metres, as I say, is bigger than we think. We have an alarm keypad, so any staff that are using the alarm keypads, they're going to be disinfectant wipes beside it so that it's cleaned. We are going to require everybody entering our building to use hand sanitizer. We're going to have automatic dispensers at both of our entrances. We have included in our risk assessment that there's going to be now a give way policy. Anybody leaving the building must give way to people entering the building. We're quite lucky in that our doors are sensor operated, so they are no touch. We're going to consider staggered start and finish times, but actually at the moment NICFA has the ability within our flexible working and working hours policy for staff to start work between 8 and 10 a.m. and we think a natural spreading of individuals coming into the workplace, so we hope that won't actually be an issue, and we may indeed have some people here still working from home on certain days. We are including in our risk assessment of our entry area regular cleaning of hands, rails and touch points, door handles, etc. Our reception area itself, we have decided, despite the fact that we think we can have people socially distanced at 2 metres, for the protection of our receptionists and those entering reception, we're going to have a perspex screen fitted. We've had someone come out and measure that. It's a bespoke one, and we feel that a fixed one is better because we weighed up the balance of someone leaning against it and knocking it over on our receptionist. Again, all of these risk assessments, you're balancing other risks as well. We have a number of staff, as you probably will, that would cover reception. But we felt that even with antibacterial wipe, you can't probably clean a handset, a telephone handset, effectively. So we're now going to use headsets for our reception staff covering reception. All of our staff used to enter the reception area to mark themselves in and out on an in-out board, and that practice has now been ceased. And we're asking staff to email our reception email address whenever they've entered the building if our receptionist hasn't seen them enter. And that's for the safety of our practices in relation to fire procedures, so that we have a note of everybody who is in the building, and also so our reception staff know who is in the building. So only the reception staff and our caretaker who has a desk there are allowed to enter that area. And in our foyer, where many of you will have been, we're now spacing out our comfortable chairs at 2 metres distance, so there won't be as many of them. So we are reducing the numbers in that area. Lift access, we are requiring it to be used by 1 person only at a time, with the exception of an event of a fire escape and somebody needing and requiring assistance. But we are now encouraging all of our staff to use the stairs and to avoid the lift, which is quite a small area. Again, the cleaning regime has to be enhanced. The buttons, for example, that are being touched, and the stairwell handrails. Moving on to kitchens, well, this is a big area, and we haven't reached all of our decisions finally on we are going to do. We've decided that within our staff canteen, which could have happily accommodated 25 of us squeezed around 2 tables for a good old chat at lunchtime, we can only have 7 people in that room now. So what are we going to do? We have over 30 staff. We are going to look at either using another room, which we are fortunate to have, one of our other meeting rooms at lunchtime, or we're going to stagger lunch and break time. So these are the options to consider. And as I said, we haven't decided, and it may be a case of trial and error, see how we go. Regular cleaning is going to be implemented after break times. Sanitising stations are going to be set up outside each kitchen, and pedal bins for any tissues that are being binned there. Our sanitising stations and our kitchens will then be at the middle of our corridors, which we feel will be helpful for people moving from one end of the corridor to the other end. In terms of crockery, we've removed all of our crockery. We've had a deep clean conducted by our caretakers over the past few weeks. We've removed all crockery, cutlery from our kitchens, and everybody's going to be given one supply that they keep at their desk, wash, clean, dry, and remove at the end of each day. And nothing is to be stored in kitchen cupboards. We're removing our microwave and toaster and leaving the fridge in use with wipes for cleaning the door handle after use. We're also going to have signage up recommending regular hand washing before and after use of any item in the kitchen. Our second floor kitchen is tiny and it's a one in, one out system that we're now going to be adopting. Tea and coffee provision is a bit of a tricky one. We provide free tea and coffee in the kitchens and we don't want to do that because that will encourage regular touching of the same hard surfaces. We're either going to provide flasks of tea and coffee on each floor for staff, or we're thinking about providing in our individual desk packs tea bags and individual coffee sachets. We haven't reached a decision on that. All of these options involve people touching either a hot water boiler tap or a pump on flask. So ideally you would need sanitising equipment beside any of those anyway. But we're seeking feedback from our staff on that. We still want to provide tea and coffee for our staff. We want it to be a comfortable place to work, but we're interested in the views of our staff on this. Our corridors, we have decided not to implement a one-way system. We felt actually it would encourage too much touching of the hand plates and handles and possibly encourage people to bump into each other more. Our doors have glass panels on them, and in our risk assessment we have said that you need to be visually aware, looking through the doors and allowing a passageway through the middle section of our corridors, which are very spacious. And we have windows in our corridors and we've recommended that those are opened as well. Toilet facilities, hand soap and towels must be replenished. This is going to be an absolute requirement for our caretaking staff. Hand dryers are out of use and signage will be in place, as well as pedal bins. And on our ground floor, where we have 4 toilet cubicles side by side, 2 will be put out of use. Same with the sinks. The printer area, we're advising that there should be no shared equipment. So don't share a pen, don't share paper, don't use your own stationery, but the printer is probably an area that people will continue to need to use. Our policy on this in our risk assessment is 1 person at a time, and there will be sanitising station available as well as cleaning wipes, which must be used. For meetings, 2 metre social distancing must be complied with and cleaning must be carried out in between. And in all offices, the biggie, can you socially distance at 2 metres? In NICFA we can. Our desks are all 2 metres apart. We're recommending that all staff open all windows where it's possible to do so. Individual hygiene packs, as I've discussed, will be provided on desks and staff are required to replenish those. We are now going to require that bins are emptied by our staff. Individual bins will be taken to the central sanitising stations in the middle of each floor, where there will be recycling and communal bins available for our staff to reduce our cleaning staff having to come into contact with too many people's things. The number of those staff, the people that are in those offices, should be restricted to those staff who work there, limit other people entering those offices. And we've stated that in our risk assessment. Cleaning staff will be the only people that should be entering offices without sort of prior arrangement. But really we're seeing that those offices are bubbles in themselves. We're going to require our staff to clean their own workstation at the end of the day. They're going to be given the packs to do that, and that's going to be required and stated in the protocol, which I'll come on to discuss a bit later on. But it will be for us to manage and to monitor our people keeping to our clutter-free and clear desk policy, and rooms should be being kept tidy, so we need to enforce that and make sure that it's happening. And then again, leaving the building, the same policy as before, giving way and maintaining social distancing at 2 metres. So that's a quick run through of the highlights of ours, and hopefully some of those practices will be helpful. I appreciate many of our workspaces are very different, but those are some of the considerations that we have gone through at NICFA, so hopefully you find some of that useful for your own circumstances. And that's me. Back to Una. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Alex. So I suppose based on what I was saying at the beginning, there's quite a lot to think about, and you know, preparing early will be critical for each organisation, because as Alex has said, you know your own work areas best, and you know your own work practices, and you know how things operate within your own premises, to start to think about all of those things. And we spent a few hours, it was even difficult for us to try and social distance while we were standing with the measuring tape and doing all of those things. But it was a really useful exercise for us to do that, and to be in the building and not try and do it, off the top of your head. So I think I would really encourage any organisation to do that walkthrough. I think that's really helpful. What I want to just touch on briefly then is regarding, we've had a lot of questions about organisations who are either a tenant in a building or they are the landlord and they rent out facilities to another tenant. So in that context, if you think about, I suppose from our point of view, we NICFA have a number of organisations in our building. So we have tenants in offices. Our duty is to ensure a risk assessment is conducted on the building, and we have done that in those individual offices as well. But there's also a duty on those organisations who are in those offices to conduct their own risk assessment on the processes that they will employ for their own staff. So the duty is on them as an employer to ensure the health and safety and well-being of their own individual employees. So it's a bit like, people have asked us over the years lots of information around insurance and who should have insurance and all of that. It's the same principle. You as an organisation will hold your own insurance. But if you rent a building, there is an expectation that the owner or the landlord will also have insurance to protect your welfare. So it's the responsibility. The key thing is that the responsibility is on both. So if you are a tenant, you can reasonably expect to ask your landlord for a copy of their risk assessment. What have they done for, in terms of the building and the public use of that building that you are in? And then it would be reasonable for them to expect you to have done the same for your own organisation or your own individual employees. So that's a question that comes up quite a bit from organisations. The other issue is around buildings with multiple use. So if you think about organisations with multiple activities. So if you think about, if I take NICFA as an example again, Alex has talked a lot about what we need to do for our staff and the use of our building, and that also includes our tenants within that context. So all of the things that Alex has mentioned applies to our tenants around the shared facilities in the building. But we also offer conference facilities to organisations, and we will be conducting a separate risk assessment on that actual activity, and we'd be saying to you to do the same. So if you think about the different activities that you as an organisation engage in, you should consider risk assessing each of those. Now, it may not need to go into as much detail as we're suggesting, but you really do need to think about the activities. So some of the questions that have come in around, how do I protect older people? How do I protect, the use of the building for counselling services or whatever that might be? We're saying the principles of risk assessment apply regardless. So you need to actually look at each activity. So back to, say, our conferencing, if you think about our building, we let the rooms out. We've started to look at each of those rooms and how many people we can fit in. And Conor will know, he regularly is up with us in the building, where we would be using the rooms for training purposes. When you start to measure out, your numbers are greatly reduced. So it doesn't mean that it won't be possible to use those facilities and to rent them out. What it means is that the numbers that we will be able to ensure that we comply with the 2 metre social distancing will be greatly reduced. So to give you a sense of it, if anyone has been in our big conference room on the ground floor, which could hold, round tables, maybe 80, but conferencing about 120, we're probably going to be reduced to 30. So it gives you a sense of, when you start to actually go through those processes and assess your activity, what might be the impact of that. So that's what you need to think about, looking at the activity and who is at risk in that activity and how can you comply with 2 metre social distancing. And that would be our key principles. I know that 1 metre is still okay, but you need to put other measures in place to ensure that if you're going to go to 1 metre social distancing, that people are protected. And if that's, wearing face masks and additional things, then you need to really seriously consider that. regarding the insurance implications, and the advice from insurers obviously is that everything is communicated to your insurer. So any change in your practice, anything significant, you should let them know. But the key issue is really around documenting everything and having, so when Alex is talking about our risk assessment, which is at 13 pages, and I think Conor was saying RCN's is at 11 pages, you know, that's really important. You have that documented and that you can provide that should there be any issues, but that it's a working document so that if things change, you know, some of the stuff we're going to, you know, try it out. We you know, I kind of feel a sense of apprehension thinking about all of the things that we're asking staff to do now, you know, when, you know, in terms of our work and practice and the very, you know, non-natural way of human interaction. But we'll have to just try it out and we'll have to see how we're, you know, how we can apply all of these things and then continue to keep our documentation up to date around that. So it's important to do so. In terms of the numbers, this is I mean, I thought it would be useful just to put in from the personal point of view, the gatherings in private dwellings permits 30 outside, but maintaining social distancing from those not in your household. I think possibly part of the conversations from the Chief Medical Officer and the Minister for Health probably are based on some of this not being complied with and the issues associated with people and bigger gatherings and all of that. But so you know, this is where it is at this moment in time. 10 indoors from not more than 4 households. As I've said, the Republic of Ireland have now reduced that to 6. And as a group of individuals, you may gather indoors or outdoors up to a maximum of 30 people. But there is a little bit of a caveat on that. And I suppose in a sense, people have asked us, you know, we offer drop-in facilities, or we do group counselling services, or we do, you know, various activity. What are we allowed to do? And it's back to the social distancing thing. You can have the 30 limit doesn't apply, and I'm going to actually read this. If gatherings operated or organised by a responsible person for cultural, entertainment, recreational, outdoor sports, social, community, educational, work, legal, religious or political purposes. And that's a direct quote from the current guidance. So the 30-person limit does not apply. The issue is around the fact that you've carried out a risk assessment on whatever it is, the activity that you're going to undertake, and that you've taken all reasonable measures to limit the risk of transmission. So, you know, if you look at that list, that pretty much covers a lot of what we as a sector do. So you're not, you know, and also if you can, you know, judge yourself as a responsible person, I suppose, is the other thing. But we as organisations can do quite a bit. But the issue is around the risk assessment, the documentation of that, and that you've taken all reasonable steps to ensure people's safety and well-being. So there's been a lot of questions that have come through about older people and vulnerabilities and all of that. So it's around the same principles that the risk assessment is carried out on the activity. If you're responsible for any of the following types of business, you must keep them closed. So soft play areas are still closed. Conference halls and conference facilities, particularly I think applying to some of the larger facilities, but they, you know, that is in the advice. You'll know bars and nightclubs unless there's a food preparation. Theatres and concert halls were permitted to open for rehearsals or live recording without an audience from the 8th of August, and that's probably helpful to some of our arts-based organisations, but again still remaining closed to the public. So the guidance you know, is due to be updated around the 4th of September, as I've said. They update this document every 28 days. But in between, we're constantly getting more and more information, so we'll keep people informed of that. I think the critical thing then that we're going to talk now is about how we actually communicate all of this to staff and how we actually keep them engaged in the process. So I'm going to hand back now to Alex to follow up on that. Okay, Alex?
Hi, thanks, Una. Okay, so I suppose having covered the risk assessment, and I started doing the risk assessment and thought, well, that'll be that, you know, that'll be that done. But really the risk assessment turned out for us really to be the start of the process. getting your actions in place, getting all of the provisions in place that you have ordered, and communicating it is actually where some of the hard work probably starts, really. And it's just the slide up, I think.
I'm sorry, Alex.
So
nope. There we go.
Thank you. So really, once I had completed the risk assessment, there was so much in it, as Una says, about changing the behaviour and the natural way that we had all been used to interacting with each other. And a risk assessment based in tabular form is quite a hard document to read. I thought it would be quite useful for us to develop another document that was really sort of pulling out from the risk assessment the behaviours, the practices, and the policies that have changed or that we are requiring our staff to adhere to now, which might be in some cases quite different from how we have previously worked. So we have developed a protocol document that we've called our workplace guidance for staff and tenants. And this is about really thinking about these resultant policies and procedures that have come from your risk assessment. We have included our staff in this process. So as I said earlier, our staff have now got a copy of the risk assessment. They're able to feed back on that. But we think now it's important, having received the risk assessment, which may have allayed some fears, that we now start to think about asking our staff about their individual circumstances. How do they feel about returning to work? We don't even have a date. It's all pie in the sky at the moment, you know, but what are their circumstances? What are their concerns? Or what are their motivations to get back? Some people may really want to get back to work for a variety of reasons, which could be very personal. But we want to try and tease out some of those so as we understand what the return to work might look like. So we are thinking about a staff survey, and I've put our first draft forward to our researcher yesterday. And it's asking those questions, you know, if you are minded to want to come back to work, what's motivating you to do that? How have you found the home working experience? Is there any equipment that you're needing? Is there anything that is making you feel that you don't wish to return to work? Maybe you're just happy working from home. Maybe you don't miss the commute. We're trying to tease out some of those to supplement the work that we are doing to ensure that we get to a point where we have an effective return to work that's informed by individual circumstances. So really from our risk assessment, we're going to be developing our protocols and our guidance for staff. But really, what the risk assessment showed me was that a lot of this isn't just about having a hand sanitizer station. It's not about having signs on the floor. It's about people behaving in the way that you would like them to behave to protect the health and safety of everybody in your workplace. And that's a different matter altogether, trying to enable behavioural change. And it's quite challenging. And we're asking it of our staff, and we're asking them to do a lot differently. So it's about working out what the behavioural changes are, what are the policy changes, and how are you going to communicate that. And we thought the easiest way was to develop a one document which literally has a list of 3 pages and 30 points on it, which says here's some of the guidance coming from our risk assessment. Could you go on to the next slide, please, Una?
Yeah, there we go.
Really, this is about the risk assessment's one thing, getting all of your products in place, getting your screens in place is another, but this is about asking people to behave maybe in a slightly different manner from before. So if you're asking people to do that, you need to make it clear, write your document in clear English, communicate it, and seek the commitment from staff. So our document has 30 points on it, as I said, so things like no handshake policy on greeting visitors to the building. Sounds so simple, but we're writing it down and we're communicating with our staff to say, we used to do this and we're not going to do it now. Whenever I'm doing interviews with people, I'll not be shaking their hands. We're going to try and reduce contact with other people. So we need to include that in our document. And at the end of our document, I feel it's useful to have some sort of line in it to say, look, we're kind of in this together, but this is about your commitment. We're all committing together to protecting the health and safety of all of us at work. So we've put a line at the end of it to say, look, sign this off and say you're committing to this. And it's not about having hard and fast rules that we're going to be disciplining on. It's about having guidance to say we all understand how we're expected to behave and we're all going to do our best to do that. But as an organisation, you'll need to monitor it. And this isn't about a piece of paper sitting on the wall. The work risk assessment is going to be a live document. It's going to be an ongoing work in progress, and we're going to have to assess it ongoing. We might not have got it all right in our first draft of our risk assessment. We need to amend that. So we may need to amend some of the behaviours and practices that we're seeing in our workplace. And what we're going to then do is, once we get to a point where we're back at work, we're going to do some pulse surveys, they seem to be being called, but we're just going to ask our staff, how's it going? And that's an opportunity for staff to say what their experience of it is, and maybe some observations that we've all got about how other people are behaving. We need to take ownership of that from our own point of view and our own behaviour. But as a management team, we all need to, I suppose, hold everybody to account. If we're signing up to protect the health and safety of us and our colleagues and the people that we care about at work, then we all need to commit to this and be seen to be adhering to the policies that we have outlined within our protocols. So those are some of my thoughts on that, and hopefully you find that helpful. And as Una says, whenever ours are finalised, we'll share them with you. That's me. Thanks, Una.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Just moving on then to any questions. And I don't know what I'm doing here. Knock myself out. But anyhow, and I suppose just to, Alex has mentioned lots of things that we've had to think about purchasing. So on a good note, we're hopeful that the Department for Communities are going to put a fund together to help organisations with the purchase of some of those essential products. We are pulling together, Seamus, our Chief Exec, put out an email last week to all our members around what their needs are, what expenditure they've incurred thus far. We've got lots of people who've fed back to us. We're happy to take more. So if any of you have already started to think about how much, what you need to purchase and how much that's going to cost, feel free to fire an email through to me today. We're collating this information and sending it through to the Department for Communities this afternoon, and at the very latest tomorrow morning. But we're pretty hopeful that they'll be very receptive to that. We've spent about 2,500 so far, but that's our initial outlay. There's going to be when you think about the sanitizers, and I have to say, if anybody is going into the shops to buy their own personal hand sanitizer, they've like quadrupled in price during this whole crisis. So it's the same for buying them for your own offices and stuff. So hopefully we're going to get some help on that, and we keep people informed. But feel free to send me any information that you want to.
That's great, Una. Thanks very much for that, and thanks very much for that, Alex, as well too. Like, that was really practical session in terms of, I suppose the one thing I took out of it was the walkthrough for people to do, in terms of going through the building, and then being able to sort of ascertain about what needs to be done. And I think that was the point that you raised, Alex, in terms of it's a behavioural thing. It's all right having as much hand sanitizer and as much sort of signs about in that as well too, but it's really about, as organisations, trying to use it in terms of ourselves and with regards to duty of care to staff, but also I suppose if anybody else is using our building, or anybody else in terms of footfall within the building as well too. I want to open it up to anybody as well too that's in the room. Now, I've just put out a question there on the chat to see if there's any other queries or questions in that there, but so far it's quite quiet. I'm assuming that's because the session was that good, whereby everything was answered. But if anybody has any particular questions that they want to ask now. We should do training more often in Zoom, because it's great. every time I do Zoom, got bombarded with questions, and that's probably another 10 or 15 minutes onwards. So it's great.
Conor, what I would just add is that on the slides, there's some links to some really useful documents. I mean, you could read forever, and you could go on forever reading some of the stuff, but there are some useful things. The one other one that I wanted to add to that was the familysupportni.gov.uk hub. I'm not sure whether any of the organisations involved today are working in the childcare field, but we've been part of this childcare reference group, which is involving lots of organisations within that environment. And there's so much advice to be given on that, and the website is really comprehensive. So there's a link to that, but there's also a link to the Department for Communities link which links to all the sporting organisations, so Ulster Rugby, GAA, all of that, and that kind of gives guidance for each of those individual sporting activities. So the links are useful if there's something in particular that you want. You can find that information.
There was one too. It was produced, I think, was it last week or week before, by Arts Council, particularly for arts organisations as well too. Yeah.
I think there's a link on the Department for Communities website to that one as well. Yeah. I see Lorraine saying about flushing taps and flushing toilets. Absolutely, and that's around Legionella. So we've been actually doing that on a weekly basis in our building. So our caretaker's been going in and flushing toilets and running the sinks and doing all of that, because that's to obviously, not make the water be the time everybody goes back.
That's great. That seems to be everything in terms of questions asked then, unless anybody has any more points to raise.
Could I have, sorry, can everybody hear me? I'm having difficulty doing this chat business thing.
I can hear you, Faye. Go ahead.
Okay. We're actually, a volunteer kind of group, and we have 3 sites, i.e. ABC, Armagh, Banbridge, Craigavon. Now, when we come together, how do we actually, some sites we have it's church-based because we've access there. How do we be happy and assured that when we enter into these buildings, that has all been covered, or how do we protect ourselves by making sure that we have either gone ahead and ensured these things have taken place, or just how does that work for us as a community group?
Hey, can I ask, are they your own buildings, or are you using those facilities?
Sorry, Una, what did you say?
Are they your buildings, or are you simply using those facilities?
We're simply using. We have, because we're spread across the 3 areas, the 3 councils, to be fair to everyone, we meet in one of those councils each time we meet, obviously rotating.
Yes.
So, as I said, we do meet the same places, but they're not our buildings. They are rented out by other people, or we access them. So how can we be assured that what we're doing for the safety of ourselves, as well as, and to make everybody want to come back, feeling that okay, I'm happy to come back. How do we cover that kind of risk assessment?
Well, I think the first thing is around who the building owner is, and asking them, have they conducted a risk assessment on their own building? And then you assess what it is you're doing, what is your activity, and to be assured that so if you're meeting, the key thing for you as a group is around the 2 metre social distancing. So you want to ensure that when you're meeting, that is what you do. And if you're meeting, and say, for example, if there's refreshments, it's thinking through all of that. That is the one that actually has given us the most challenge. So, at this point in time, we wouldn't be, serving any refreshments, or, very simple things like what we normally do. And, with meetings in the NECFA building, we put out a coffee pot and everybody uses it and uses the milk, and hands go into the sugar and all that sort of stuff. So there are practices which seem very simple but should stop, so things like that. If it's a meeting, but also the 2 metre social distancing is critical. But you would also want to be assured that the building that you're using is also taking whatever steps to protect any users of that. So around, the cleaning of facilities, the use of sanitizing, the social distancing. So all the things that we've said should apply in the use of, if they're offering that for public use, that should apply. They should be taking all of the steps that we've talked about, and then you, in terms of your activity, you guide your members through that as well.
Okay, thank you, Anna. That's very
all right.
clear. Thank you.
Any other questions? That's great. What I'd like to do now, if I could thank Una and Alex for the presentation and for helping us with regards to that. That was really comprehensive and it was really useful, and especially in terms of how it's done practically. It's one of them things whereby, it's okay telling us to do about policies and procedures, but whenever you actually walk it through about how it actually works in practice, I think that's really, really useful, and particularly useful for regards to our groups. Can I thank everybody that's attended today as well too? Just to let you, just a reminder that I'll be sending out the copy of the presentation later on today or tomorrow, and also that we're hoping that a recording will go up on our website as well too, of the webinar today. And also keep an eye on NICFA's website, NICFA's Twitter, our website, our Facebook page, and also Twitter as well too, which we keep up to date with regards to what's actually said in terms of what the executive decisions has been made, and also in terms of anything that's PHAs related as well too. So we'll be sharing that as well too. But hope everybody stays safe. Keep an eye on any of our future webinars. And again, thanks for everybody for turning up.
Thanks, Connor.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Connor.
Thank you.